Most modern seekers pass over dried stains on stone or the subtle drainage grooves in ancient altars, unaware that these remnants point to the longest-standing spiritual transaction in human history. Blood rites, especially those involving live sacrifice, are not primitive anomalies. They form a coherent spiritual logic that span millennia and continents. What made blood such a universally feared yet revered medium? Its immediate, undeniable vitality. Blood pulses with warmth and oxygen, its presence or absence the fine line between life and death. From early Mesopotamian temples to Mesoamerican pyramids, blood was treated not merely as symbolic, but as literal sustenance for gods, spirits, and cosmic order. The Aztecs offered human hearts atop Templo Mayor not out of brutality, but to ensure the sun would rise, each drop a divine debt paid forward. In field study, researchers note the architecture of sacrifice zones: central elevation for visibility, sloped plains for drainage, and containers or channels to collect the flow. In regions like Ethiopia's Lalibela, cuts in rock floor align with ancient channels, proof of intentional fluid management. Archaeological strata confirm this. Concentrations of hemoglobin residues and iron-rich soils where rituals were known to occur. The ritual roles were codified. In Vedic traditions, the yajna was a highly orchestrated fire offering, often with animal sacrifice, carried out only by trained Brahmins. The knife, the timing, the chant all functioned to align temporal and cosmic order. A misstep could nullify the rite or worse, invert its effect. This fear of spiritual contamination also explains the taboos and purifications surrounding these acts, why the sacrificer was often separated afterward, sometimes for life. Today, some surviving traditions, such as Afro-Caribbean Santeria or West African Vodun, retain forms of animal offering, adapted within strict legal and ethical frameworks. A chicken or goat is not chosen at random. Age, sex, health, and even coat color may align with specific orisha or lawa, believed to enhance efficacy. Observers who dismiss these as superstition miss the embedded codes, ritual logic designed to ensure that the transaction, however unsettling, was balanced. But not all offerings required death. Bloodletting without killing, piercing tongues, ears, genitals, was practiced by Maya elites to commune with ancestors. This voluntary sacrifice inverted the victim, perpetrator dynamic and established spiritual worthiness through self-wound. Still, as societies evolved, many turned away from such rites. Political consolidation, new moral paradigms, and theological shifts framed sacrifice as abhorrent or obsolete. Yet even as literal blood rites receded, echoes remain. Phrases like blood pact, symbols like the crucifixion, or ritual offerings of red wine preserve the frame. That sacrifice binds the spiritual and material. In hushed temple chambers and open dirt floor gatherings alike, a sudden stillness often precedes the moment. Eyes roll back, limbs tremble, breath stops. Then, with a jolt, the possessed speaks in voices not their own. Far from mere theater, spirit possession is among the most enduring and feared spiritual phenomena, because it collapses the boundary between self and other, mortal and divine. Contrary to popular belief, not all possessions were seen as hostile or pathological. In fact, many traditions cultivated them deliberately. In Hades Vadu, during a fete, practitioners invite LWA spirits into their bodies through drumming, dance, and chant. The moment of possession, known as being mounted, is sacred. The host becomes a vessel, and the spirit, a distinct identity with its own tastes, movements, and speech, takes command. These identities are so consistent that communities recognize which LWA has arrived based on behavior alone. Baron Samedi with his lewd humor, Urzuli with her weeping grace. But how does one tell true possession from performance? Veteran observers note physiological signs not easily faked. Sudden body temperature shifts, eye color changes, altered strength or flexibility, and post-possession amnesia. In Balinese trance rituals, iron spikes pierce the cheeks of the possessed without bleeding, an effect researchers suspect involves a psychosomatic override of pain and circulation. Yet even this fails to fully explain how such consistency is maintained across individuals, ceremonies, and generations. Induction protocols vary. Among the Tsar cults of the Horn of Africa, possession is not always invited but treated as an affliction to be appeased. The afflicted person's behavior, unexplained illness, violent moods, or social withdrawal, is read as spirit intrusion. Drumming, incense, and chants draw the entity out, allowing a kind of negotiation to occur. If satisfied, the spirit may leave. If not, the person may remain in a semi-possessed state indefinitely. Here, possession is feared not as glory but as a parasitic force. Western interpretations often misread these practices as delusion or mental illness, but anthropological fieldwork, including studies by I.M. Lewis and others, shows that possession systems are coherent, culturally patterned, and often provide a structured means for individuals, especially women or marginalized groups, to gain voice, agency, or healing in ways unavailable to them otherwise. Still, the risks are real. Some possessions spiral into loss of bodily control, harm to self or others, or lasting psychological fracture. Exorcisms, rituals meant to eject spirits, exist in nearly every culture as the inverse mechanism. From Catholic rites invoking saints to Tibetan churd practices, where the practitioner offers their body to spirits as a form of radical compassion, the goal is re-establishment of sovereignty. Modern offshoots like charismatic Christian deliverance or ayahuasca-induced trance states continue the pattern under new language, the divine entering the human vessel to impart wisdom, healing, or judgment. Technology hasn't erased the practice, it's shifted its language and stage. Most visitors to ancient tombs feel awe, perhaps fear, but few recognize that some of these sites doubled as consultation chambers, not for the living alone, but for carefully structured communication with the dead. Necromancy, the deliberate summoning of spirits to extract knowledge, favor, or vengeance, has been outlawed, suppressed, and moralized against for over 2,000 years. Yet it endured in whispered rituals and encoded scripts because it addressed one of humanity's most persistent urges: to know what lies beyond and what the dead still know. In Mesopotamia, necromantic rites were catalogued as early as the first millennium BCE. Clay tablets describe the ritual purification of the practitioner, the burning of incense, and offerings placed in burial shafts to attract the edimu, restless spirits. These were not casual acts. The practitioner stood on contested ground. Any misstep could result in spiritual backlash, illness, or even death. The dead were believed capable of revealing secrets, future events, hidden crimes, ancestral curses, but only if appeased properly. Greek texts add layers of complexity. The Necromanteon of Ephra, thought to be an oracle of the dead, was built atop a cavern system believed to house chthonic forces. Archaeological surveys confirm antechambers, narrow labyrinths, and soot-stained walls, suggesting controlled darkness, sensory deprivation, and torch-based rituals. There, practitioners consumed hallucinogenic substances and performed invocations to summon shades. The goal: extract prophecy from those no longer bound by time. But this was never mere curiosity. Necromancy carried profound spiritual risk. In Jewish tradition, the Witch of Endor episode in 1 Samuel, where Saul demands a medium raise the prophet Samuel, stands as a warning. The act succeeds, but at great cost. Samuel's ghost, according to the text, predicts Saul's imminent death. The underlying message: the dead do not always offer peace, and summoning them breaches divine order. In Rome, necromancy became entangled with imperial fear. By the 3rd century CE, laws criminalized consultations with the dead, especially for political or treasonous purposes. That fear reveals the practice's perceived potency. Emperors did not ban toys. In medieval Europe, necromantic practice was reinterpreted through Christian frameworks. Manuals like the Liber Juratus or Picatrix outlined coded steps, the use of bones, graveyard dirt, planetary hours, and invocations of both angels and demons. The necromancer became an ambiguous figure, part scholar, part heretic, always outside the bounds of acceptable faith. The Church's condemnation was absolute, yet inquisitors often knew the scripts themselves, another sign of how closely power and forbidden knowledge entwined. Modern echoes persist. Spirit boards, seances, and EVP sessions might seem diluted, but they preserve the necromantic structure: boundary setting, invocation, a medium, and a question. In more serious circles, such as Afro-Brazilian Umbanda or traditional Siberian shamanism, the dead are still called upon for guidance, healing, or justice. Not metaphorically, but literally. The key distinctions lie in intent and control. Protective circles, the timing of the ritual often aligned with liminal periods like twilight or equinoxes, and the state of the practitioner, purified, fasted, or altered, all function to reduce the risk of attachment when the summoned refuses to leave. But these are remnants of one of the oldest and most feared spiritual technologies: binding. Unlike summoning or sacrifice, binding spells aimed not to honor or ask, but to restrain. Whether directed at spirits, rivals, or forces of nature, the goal was simple: seize control through ritual fixation. The evidence is vast. In ancient Mesopotamia, curse tablets, shiptu, used inscribed texts, pierced figurines, and incantations to tie the tongue of enemies or bind them from success. These spells invoked local deities or spirits to enforce compliance. Archaeologists have unearthed thousands of these lead tablets across the Near East and Mediterranean, their language precise and formulaic. Target named, offense described, desired outcome commanded. Often the tablets were nailed, burned, or submerged, physical acts believed to mirror the spiritual constraint. The Greeks and Romans systematized this into depictions, many written in voces magicae, nonsense syllables designed to bypass conscious resistance and compel unseen powers. They were folded, pierced with nails, and deposited in graves, wells, or sanctuaries, spaces where the boundary between worlds was thin. Some targeted legal opponents, athletes, or lovers. Others aimed at preventing testimony, causing illness, or summoning an enforcing demon. What united them was the structure: material proxy, written intent, secret placement. In Egypt, binding intersected with image magic. Figurines of bound captives, hands tied behind backs, faces gagged, were inscribed with names and buried under fortresses. These were not symbols, but ritual assurances that enemies would be spiritually disabled before they could strike. Even temple rituals used bindings to limit the influence of foreign gods or malevolent entities. These were rehearsals in sovereignty, reinforcing the practitioner's control over a hostile cosmos. The logic persists in modern traditions. Hoodoo, freezer spells, often involve writing a person's name, sealing it in a container, and freezing it to suspend their influence. In parts of South Asia, lemon and chili charms or black thread amulets serve to bind the evil eye or malevolent spirits, rendering them inert. In Japanese afuda, sacred texts are pasted onto doorways to ward or bind unwanted energies from entering. But binding was never risk-free. Without balance, a binding could rebound on its maker, a concept echoed in the Hindu principle of karma and in Western threefold return. To counter this, many traditions insisted on justification. The target must be deserving, the harm proportionate, the wording precise. Otherwise, the energy could invert. Materials mattered. Hair, nail clippings, bodily fluids, these linked the spell to the target through sympathetic magic. Iron nails symbolized fixation, red thread, entanglement, mirrors, reversal. Even timing was critical. Waning moons favored restraint. Eclipses offered potency but danger. In advanced traditions, practitioners created spirit contracts to compel enforcement, often requiring offerings, oaths, or sigils as payment. The existence of binding magic reveals a core spiritual fear. That freedom can be stolen invisibly. It also reflects an unspoken truth of many traditions: that control, not reverence, is often the real motive. A shallow incision on the forearm, exposed to ash and oil, might seem brutal to the uninitiated. But across the globe, pain has marked the path to spiritual maturity, not as punishment but as transformation. Unlike passive endurance, initiatory pain is chosen, structured, and encoded. It separates the seeker from the profane world and prepares them to hold power. In Australia's Arnhem Land, young Yolngu men undergo circumcision and tooth avulsion during their initiation. The physical agony is not hidden, it is communal, public, and ceremonial. The pain is a passage. Only through it can one access ancestral knowledge encoded in songlines and body art. The act imprints both memory and meaning, sealing identity in blood and nerve. Among the Maasai of Kenya and Tanzania, female and male circumcision traditionally marked adulthood. While international debates now question the ethics and legality of these rites, especially in the case of female genital cutting, the spiritual framework cannot be ignored. Elders believed that pain, courage, and the willingness to shed part of the body signaled readiness to receive secrets and fulfill responsibilities. What's striking is how consistent this logic is. In the Amazon, the Satermawe tribe uses bullet ant gloves. Initiates insert their hands into woven mitts filled with paralyzed ants whose sting ranks at the top of the Schmidt Sting Pain Index, described as waves of burning, throbbing, all-consuming pain. The initiate must keep the gloves on for 5 minutes, not once, but 20 times across months. No scream, no flinch. The cost of spiritual power is clarity through agony. Neuroscience has attempted to decode this. Pain triggers endorphin floods, induces altered states, and in ritual contexts, heightens sensory processing and memory imprinting. This aligns with traditional claims. After the ordeal, many initiates report visions, heightened dreams, or deep calm. In Sufi practices, prolonged whirling leads to pain from muscle exhaustion and disorientation, but also to ecstasy. In Zen, hours of rigid sitting during sesshin generate piercing joint pain that practitioners interpret as the gateway to ego death. The transformative quality lies not in the injury but in its structure. Ritual pain always has boundaries, duration, witnesses, meaning. Without these, it drifts into trauma. With them, it becomes a ladder. Even Christian mystics spoke of the dark night of the soul, a psychic pain that purified like fire. Saint Teresa of Avila described her ecstasies as both blissful and searing. The pain was not incidental, it was evidence of contact. Yet not all who pass through survive unchanged. Some break. Some return with scars that speak more of injury than insight. That risk is part of the pact. In many traditions, only those who endure can speak, heal, or lead. Initiation separates not by birth but by ordeal. A whispered phrase, uttered in the right moment, in the right way, could bring illness, misfortune, even death, or so it was believed. Curses were feared not because they inflicted physical harm directly, but because they operated invisibly over time and often with devastating precision. In every corner of the world, across social classes and belief systems, the curse emerged as the spiritual equalizer, a tool as feared in the mouths of peasants as it was in the hands of sorcerers. In ancient Egypt, tombs were inscribed with curses to protect the dead. These warnings were not symbolic. They invoked gods like Sekhmet or Anubis to strike down trespassers with disease, madness, or misfortune. One such inscription reads, "Cursed be those who disturb the rest of the pharaoh. Their limbs shall be torn asunder, their children orphaned, and their houses destroyed." Archaeological records suggest these were taken seriously, even by grave robbers who sometimes left hurried offerings to placate angry spirits. But curses weren't limited to the dead. The Hittites, Greeks, and Babylonians all used curse tablets, inscribed sheets of lead rolled and hidden in wells, graves, or sanctuaries. These spells named the target, specified the harm, and invoked divine enforcement. A gladiator might curse his opponent's strength, a lover might curse a rival's beauty, a merchant might curse a competitor's wares. The specificity is chilling. May her tongue swell with lies, may her womb bear no child, may her sleep be haunted. These weren't general malice, they were surgical strikes. Linguistically, curses followed patterns. repetition, rhythm, invocation, and irreversible clauses. Many closed with phrases like, "Let it not be undone," or, "As I bind this, so let it be bound." The act of speaking was part of the weapon. In Irish tradition, Glám Dyson, a poet's curse, was considered so potent it could blight crops and disfigure faces. The poet, trained in cadence and memorization, was feared as much as revered. Curses often required physical anchors: hair, nails, soil from footprints, or symbolic items burned, buried, or pierced. In Afro-Caribbean systems, these are known as personal concerns, objects linking the spiritual target to the ritual act. Without them, the curse lacked precision. With them, the result could be devastating. But curses didn't always come from ritualists. In many cultures, the oppressed or wronged were believed to hold a natural curse power. In the Balkans, the curse of the widow or curse of the orphan carried weight, believed to summon divine retribution because of the injustice they endured. In parts of West Africa, the dying breath of a betrayed elder could curse descendants for generations. These organic curses were harder to deflect because they were not crafted, they were born of moral fracture. Protection from curses formed its own system. Amulets, salt lines, talismans, and counter-incantations were deployed preemptively. In Jewish Kabbalistic traditions, the Hamsa and Psalm recitations warded off the Ayin Hara, evil eye. In Islamic practice, verses of the Quran inscribed on paper and worn close to the heart served as shields. In East Asia, food talismans, burned and drunk as tea, could nullify spoken harm. It's easy to dismiss stories of self-sacrifice as myth, but scattered across time are chillingly consistent accounts of individuals who walked deliberately into death, not for war, not for honor, but to bridge the human and divine. Ecstatic death, where life was surrendered willingly in a ritual context, represents one of the most feared and revered spiritual practices in human history. It was not suicide in despair, but an offering calibrated with terrifying precision. In ancient Vedic India, the Mahaprasthana, the Great Departure, was a prescribed path for sages who had completed their earthly duties. Texts describe ascetics walking into the forest, fasting unto death, or entering the Himalayas never to return. This was not abandonment but transcendence. The Upanishadic logic held that bodily death, performed in purity and control, could collapse the self into the absolute. Elsewhere, the practice took more visible, public forms. The Norse blot ceremonies, especially in times of famine or crisis, sometimes included voluntary human offerings to Odin or Thor. Accounts from the saga literature and early Christian chroniclers speak of chosen warriors or priests being hanged, stabbed, or drowned, not in punishment, but as conduits to renew cosmic balance. These were ecstatic deaths, often accompanied by altered consciousness through mead, mushrooms, or trance dance. But the most structured form of ecstatic death emerged in Mesoamerica. Among the Aztecs, selected individuals became living embodiments of gods during ritual cycles. The Ixipla, a human god image, was chosen for beauty, health, and perfection. For a year, they were treated with reverence, dressed in divine regalia, and housed in temples. On the final day, they danced toward the sacrificial stone, ascended it voluntarily, and had their heart cut out. This was not considered murder, it was transcendence. The soul, having lived as a god, returned to the divine realm bearing the prayers of the people. In Japan, the Buddhist practice of Sokushinbutsu took the concept to harrowing lengths. Monks seeking ultimate detachment undertook a 1,000-day regimen. A strict diet to remove body fat, ingestion of lacquer tree sap to preserve the flesh, and complete meditation in a sealed stone chamber with only a breathing tube. When their bell stopped ringing from inside, the tube was removed and the tomb sealed. Years later, the body would be unearthed. If mummified intact, the monk was declared enlightened. If not, the process was seen as incomplete. Fewer than 24 successful Sokushinbutsu remain documented, each a monument to spiritual extremity. But why was death the offering? In many systems, death was not an end but an energy. To give one's life at the apex of devotion was to align perfectly with the divine order. Timing mattered. Equinoxes, eclipses, or the completion of sacred cycles increased potency. So did location. Sacrificial stones, burial mounds, mountaintops, and cave mouths served as thresholds. These were not places of tragedy, but of intentional transition. And the effects rippled outward. Communities treated such deaths as blessings or omens. Crops were expected to thrive, rain to return, enemies to falter, but not all were comfortable with the implications. As spiritual paradigms shifted, especially under monotheistic or modernist pressure, such practices were condemned, driven underground, or erased from records. A traveler might glance into a darkened mirror and see only their own face, slightly distorted. But to ancient ritualists, that reflection could become a door, one that opened both ways. Across traditions, mirrors and other reflective surfaces were not mundane objects but volatile thresholds. Properly prepared, they could summon spirits, reveal secrets, or trap entities. Improperly used, they could fracture the self or invite something that would not leave. In Chinese Taoist practice, mirrors were engraved with sigils and often placed above doors, not for decoration, but as spiritual defenses. The Bagua mirror, octagonal and etched with trigrams, was believed to reflect harmful spirits and redirect them. Placement was critical, aligned to counteract sha qi, destructive energy vectors from roads, corners, or graves. Yet the same principle could be inverted. In internal alchemical rites, polished bronze mirrors were used in darkness to induce trance states, the practitioner staring not at their face, but into it, seeking the true form beneath. In the Greco-Roman world, cataptromancy, divination using mirrors, was practiced in sacred pools, bowls of oil, or silvered glass. One method involved a sick person gazing into water to reveal the spirit causing illness. In another, a virgin would lower a mirror into a temple well, speaking invocations to summon a vision of the future. The condition was always liminality, twilight hours, sacred space, purified breath. Medieval grimoires took this further. The speculum, a consecrated black mirror, was crafted from obsidian, glass, or polished metal. The Heptameron and Lemegeton outlined how to prepare it: fasted for 3 days, washed in running water, fumigated with specific herbs, and inscribed with divine names. The practitioner would then anoint the mirror, draw a protective circle, and recite conjurations, often during planetary hours. If successful, the surface would cloud, and shapes would emerge: angels, demons, or the dead. These were not metaphors. What made mirrors so potent? Physically, they reflect light with near perfection. Spiritually, they symbolize inversion, duplication, and false selfhood. In African diasporic traditions, mirrors are often covered during funerals, not out of respect but out of fear. The belief that the soul, disoriented after death, might become trapped inside and linger. To this day, some practitioners refuse to sleep with uncovered mirrors, especially near beds. In Japan, the Yata no Kagami, the sacred mirror of the Shinto pantheon, is one of the imperial regalia. It represents wisdom and truth, but also holds a darker duality. Folklore warns of cursed mirrors that reflect more than light, haunted by memories, emotions, or even beings that watch from the other side. Some Shinto priests consecrate or discard old mirrors with ceremony, acknowledging their accumulated charge. In Victorian England, mirror seances became fashionable. Participants gazed into large black mirrors, often in candlelight, to contact loved ones. The practice blurred spiritualism with necromancy. Some reports described visions of faces not known to the viewer, sudden cold drafts, or emotional collapse. Modern occultists still use scrying mirrors, often black obsidian or acrylic. Preparation remains strict: silence, minimal light, and mental purification. Users report seeing moving images, hearing internal voices, or sensing presences. The danger lies in fixation, gazing too long without grounding. Mirrors reflect what you bring. If the practitioner carries unresolved grief, fear, or rage, the mirror may amplify or echo it. But the most feared mirrors weren't just tools, they were traps. Stories persist of mirrors that could bind spirits, reflecting them but not releasing. In rituals of banishment, a mirror might be used to catch a possessing force, sealed afterward with salt and buried or broken. The belief, Once reflected, the entity could be held in that image state indefinitely. To the untrained ear, a name is just a label. But in spiritual traditions across continents and centuries, names, true names, were considered keys to the soul. To know the true name of a person, spirit, or deity was to hold influence over them, and to reveal one's own was to risk exposure, binding, or even destruction. The fear wasn't metaphorical, it was ritual logic. Names could be used as weapons. In ancient Egypt, the myth of Isis and Ra illustrates this with chilling clarity. According to the story, Ra, the sun god, grew old and began to drool. Isis collected his spittle, created a magical serpent, and placed it on his path. When bitten, Ra cried out in agony. Isis offered to heal him if he revealed his secret name. After resisting, he finally relented. With his true name spoken aloud, Isis gained a portion of his divine power, elevating herself beyond other deities. The implication was stark. Even gods could be unmade by their names. This belief permeated magical practice. In the Jewish Kabbalistic tradition, the Shem HaMephorash, the 72-letter name of God, was considered so potent that only the most sanctified could utter it. Some texts suggest it allowed control over angels and natural forces. Improper usage risked madness or death. This aligns with the Talmudic notion that Adam, the first man, knew all creatures, names, and thus held dominion over them, until that knowledge was lost or concealed. Islamic mysticism echoes this. The Ism Allah 2 BF 1E93 AM, the greatest name of God, is believed to grant immediate answer to prayer and miraculous power. Yet its exact pronunciation is hidden, known only to prophets or the spiritually perfected. In certain Sufi orders, initiates are given secret names by their peer guide, used only in zikr, remembrance, or inner communication.